Every father knows the sting of being judged by his clothes instead of his character. Maurice Johnson has felt those stares his entire life, the way people's eyes skip over him like he's invisible, worthless, beneath their notice. He sits in the fancy hotel lobby wearing his work shirt, helping his daughter's friends prepare for their study abroad trip. The wealthy guests whisper and point, making assumptions about this man who doesn't belong in their world. Then Maurice begins to speak. Spanish flows naturally, followed by Arabic, then Japanese, with perfect pronunciation. The whispers stop. The pointing turns to staring. This poor dad they've been dismissing speaks 9 languages fluently. He knows their cultures better than they know their own. When the hotel owner realizes what he's witnessing, everything changes. But will one moment of recognition be enough to transform a lifetime of being overlooked? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor of the Grand Ambassador Hotel as Maurice Johnson pushed his maintenance cart through the opulent lobby. At 57, his hands bore the calluses of decades spent fixing what others broke, cleaning what others soiled, and remaining invisible to those who mattered. The handwritten language notebook, tucked beneath his cleaning supplies, had been his constant companion for over 15 years, filled with conjugations, cultural notes, and the patient scribblings of a man who refused to let circumstances define his limits. Maurice paused before the towering windows that overlooked downtown Portland, watching the early commuters hurry past with their pressed suits and purposeful strides. He remembered when he used to dream of walking among them, briefcase in hand, heading to meetings that mattered. Those dreams felt like echoes from another lifetime now, buried beneath the weight of necessity and the responsibilities that came. With raising a daughter alone, the death of his wife, Elena, had changed everything. She had been the dreamer in their marriage, the one who encouraged him to take night classes, who believed that words could build bridges between people. "Languages are keys, Maurice," she used to say, while helping him practice Spanish pronunciation. At their kitchen table, every new language unlocks a different way of seeing the world. When cancer took her 5 years ago, Maurice had channeled his grief into something productive. Learning became his meditation, his way of staying connected to her memory. Their daughter Amara was now 21, a senior at Portland State University, studying international business. She had inherited Elena's quick mind and Maurice's quiet determination, though she possessed something neither parent had ever known: the confidence that comes from growing up middle class, from never having to wonder if there would be food on the table or heat in the winter. Maurice had sacrificed everything to give her that security, working double shifts and taking on extra jobs to ensure she could focus on her studies rather than survival. The maintenance work at the Grand Ambassador paid well enough, and the health benefits were decent, but Maurice often felt like a ghost moving through the gleaming hallways. The hotel catered to international business travelers and diplomats, creating a perfect laboratory for his linguistic passion. Over the years, he had quietly absorbed conversations in Mandarin, observed the subtle differences between Mexican and Argentinian Spanish, and noted how French diplomats switched to English when they wanted to exclude someone from their discussions. His small apartment in southeast Portland told the story of his secret education. Language learning books lined every wall. Some purchased, used, others borrowed from the library, and renewed so many times the librarians had stopped charging late fees. Sticky notes with vocabulary words covered his bathroom mirror, his refrigerator, even the steering wheel of his 15-year-old Honda Civic. In the evenings, after Amara finished her homework and went to bed, Maurice would settle into his worn armchair with headphones and language audio courses, his notebook open, methodically building his understanding one word at a time. What started as helping Amara with her high school Spanish had evolved into Something much larger. When she struggled with French, Maurice learned French. When she needed help understanding cultural context for her international relations courses, Maurice dove into Arabic, Mandarin, and Russian. He learned Portuguese to help her roommate, Japanese to assist a study group, and Swahili, simply because the rhythm of the language reminded him of Elena's laughter. The hotel staff knew Maurice as the quiet maintenance man who somehow always knew which cleaning supplies worked best on different surfaces, who could fix any mechanical problem, and who never complained about working holidays or weekends. What they didn't know was that he spent his lunch breaks in the hotel's business center, using the computers to research cultural nuances and historical contexts that textbooks often missed. He had become a student of not just languages, but of the cultures they represented, understanding that true communication required more than vocabulary and grammar. Stefan Varga, the hotel's owner, was a mystery to most of the staff. He appeared periodically, usually in expensive suits that probably cost more than Maurice made in a month. He had a reputation for being observant and fair, though distant. Maurice had noticed him over the years, the way he watched people, how he seemed to notice details that others missed. There was something in Stefan's eyes that suggested depth, as if he understood what it meant to work for everything you had. Maurice's routine was predictable by design. He arrived at 6 each morning, before the lobby filled with guests, and began his rounds. First, the executive floors, where he often overheard conference calls in languages the businessmen assumed no one else understood. Then, the diplomatic suites, where conversations about trade agreements and cultural exchanges provided him with real-world context for his studies. Finally, the public spaces, where he could observe the subtle dance of international hospitality. It was during these morning rounds that Maurice had begun quietly helping international guests who seemed lost or frustrated. A whispered translation for a Japanese businessman struggling with the concierge, a cultural tip for a German family confused by American tipping customs. These small interventions always remained invisible, unnoticed by management, but Maurice felt Elena's presence in these moments, her belief that understanding could bridge any divide. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days in a place dedicated to international hospitality while remaining professionally invisible. He watched hotel staff struggle to communicate with foreign guests, saw opportunities missed because of language barriers, observed the subtle discomfort that arose when cultural misunderstandings weren't addressed. Maurice understood that effective communication was about more than speaking someone's language. It was about understanding their context, their values, their unspoken expectations. His notebook had grown thick with observations about different cultural approaches to business, family, and respect. He had learned that eye contact meant different things in different cultures, that silence could be as meaningful as words, and that the way someone accepted or declined help revealed volumes about their background. These insights came not from textbooks, but from careful observation, from years of listening and learning in the shadows. Amara often marveled at her father's dedication. "Dad, you speak more languages than most of my international relations professors," she would say, pride evident in her voice. But Maurice always deflected such compliments. He saw his linguistic abilities not as extraordinary, but as necessary. Tools he had developed to better understand the world his daughter was preparing to enter. The Grand Ambassador attracted guests from every continent, creating opportunities for Maurice to practice and refine his skills. He had learned to identify accents, to distinguish between formal and informal registers in different languages, and to recognize when someone was struggling to communicate in English. These moments of recognition had become his specialty. The ability to step in quietly, offer assistance in someone's native language, and fade back into invisibility before anyone noticed. His co-workers respected him, but didn't really know him. To them, Maurice was reliable, competent, and unusually knowledgeable about foreign cultures. but they assumed his insights came from television or casual reading. None of them suspected that the quiet maintenance man could discuss classical Arabic poetry, explain the difference between Mandarin regional dialects, or provide cultural context for Japanese business practices. The morning routine was comforting in its predictability, but lately Maurice had begun to feel restless. Amara would graduate soon and begin her career in international business. She had already secured an internship with a multinational corporation, a position that would likely lead to opportunities around the world. As proud as he was of her success, Maurice couldn't help wondering what his own life might look like once his primary purpose, supporting her education, was fulfilled. These thoughts occupied his mind as he finished his morning rounds and prepared for the moment that would change everything. In just a few hours, a group of international students would gather in the hotel lobby, struggling with cultural preparation for their exchange programs. Amara would call to ask for his help, as she had done countless times before. But this time, the conversation wouldn't happen in the privacy of their apartment or over a quiet phone call in the hotel's back corridors. This time, the world would be watching. The afternoon light filtered through the Grand Ambassador's crystal chandeliers as Maurice wheeled his maintenance cart past a cluster of agitated young people near the lobby's seating area. Their voices carried the particular stress that comes with preparation anxiety, the high-pitched exchanges of students facing something overwhelming. He recognized the international student welcome packet scattered across the coffee table, its multilingual sections creating a colorful mess of confusion. "I can't figure out the cultural expectations section," a young woman with an Italian accent was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "The English translation doesn't match what my host family expects." "Same problem here," replied a young man whose Mandarin accent was barely detectable in his English. "The business customs section for Germany makes no sense. They say direct communication, but then mention all these unspoken rules." Maurice slowed his cart, pretending to dust a nearby marble pillar while listening. He had seen this scenario countless times. Bright students reduced to anxiety by cultural guidebooks that explained what people did without explaining why they did it. The International Student Welcome Packet was a well-intentioned document that managed to create more confusion than clarity. A third voice joined the conversation, this one carrying the lilting tones of Portuguese. "My exchange coordinator in Brazil said Americans are informal, but the business school orientation packet says formality is crucial." "Which is it?" Maurice's phone buzzed. Amara's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, are you busy? I'm with some classmates who are struggling with their study abroad prep. You know how you always help me understand the cultural stuff that textbooks mess up. Could you talk to them for a few minutes?" Maurice glanced around the lobby. The usual afternoon crowd was settling in. Business travelers with laptops, a family with expensive luggage waiting for check-in, hotel staff moving efficiently between tasks. The students were clearly frustrated, and their conversation was beginning to attract attention from other guests, though not the helpful kind. "Of course, sweetheart. Put me on speaker." "Thanks, Dad. Everyone, this is my father Maurice. He's amazing with cultural context and languages. Dad, we have Maria from Italy going to Japan, Chen from China headed to Germany, and João from Brazil studying in the US. Maurice cleared his throat, switching instinctively to Italian. "Maria, the cultural expectations section you're reading. It's written by people who've never lived the daily reality. Let me explain what you really need to know about Japanese business culture." The lobby seemed to freeze. Maria's eyes widened as Maurice's Italian flowed with the natural rhythm of someone who understood not just the words, but the cultural weight behind them. He explained the concept of tatame and hon, the difference between public facade and true feelings, and how understanding this distinction would help her navigate Japanese academic and social situations. Without missing a beat, he switched to Mandarin. "Chen, German directness isn't about being rude, it's about showing respect for your time and intelligence. When Germans are direct, they're treating you as an equal who can handle honest communication. Chen nearly dropped his phone. Maurice continued in flawless Mandarin, explaining the historical and cultural reasons behind German business customs, the importance of punctuality not as rigidity, but as a form of respect, and how to interpret different levels of formality. In academic settings, Maurice continued, now speaking Portuguese with the warm cadence of someone who understood Brazilian culture intimately. American informality and American business formality coexist. The key is reading context, not following rules. By now, the lobby had grown quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as guests and staff turned to stare at this maintenance man who was effortlessly switching between languages with the fluency of a seasoned diplomat. Maurice, absorbed in helping the students, didn't notice the audience he had attracted. He continued in English, tying the cultural insights together. The problem with these guidebooks is they tell you what people do without explaining why. Culture isn't a set of rules to memorize, it's a way of seeing the world. When you understand the why, the what makes perfect sense. This is incredible, Maria whispered, forgetting she was on speaker. You explain in 5 minutes what 3 cultural orientation sessions couldn't teach me. From his position on the mezzanine overlooking the lobby, Stefan Varga had stopped his conversation with the hotel's general manager. He watched as the maintenance man, whose name Stefan realized he didn't even know, demonstrated a level of cultural and linguistic expertise that surpassed most of the international business consultants the hotel employed. Maurice was still, talking, now addressing specific questions about gift-giving protocols, academic hierarchy expectations, and regional variations in business customs. His voice had grown more confident, more animated, as he shared insights gained through years of careful observation and study. One more thing, Maurice said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned through necessity rather than privilege. Remember that being foreign isn't a disadvantage. It's an opportunity to ask questions that locals can't ask because they've never thought about why they do things certain ways. Your outsider perspective is valuable. Use it. The key, students were effusive in their gratitude, promising to call again if they ran into cultural confusion during their exchanges. As Maurice ended the call, he became aware of the silence around him. The lobby, which had been filled with the usual hum of conversation and activity, was now focused entirely on him. An elderly woman in a Chanel suit, who had been watching from a nearby chair, approached him slowly. "Excuse me," she said in accented English, "but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm struggling with some business correspondence in Italian. My translator made it technically correct, but culturally wrong. Could you—" "Of course," Maurice replied, automatically switching to Italian to address her concerns. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed. A Japanese businessman needed help understanding the cultural subtext of an American contract. A German couple wanted advice about gift-giving customs for their American hosts. Each request was answered with the same combination of linguistic precision and cultural insight that had amazed the students. Maurice found himself standing in the center of the Grand Ambassador's lobby, no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. The maintenance cart sat forgotten as he became the bridge between cultures, the translator not just of words, but of understanding. For the first time in his adult life, he was using the skills he had developed in secret, sharing the knowledge he had accumulated through years of quiet observation. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. His posture straightened, his voice grew stronger, and his movements became more assured. This was Maurice Johnson, not as the world had seen him, but as he truly was, a master of communication, a student of humanity, a bridge between worlds. Stefan Varga descended the mezzanine stairs slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. He had spent the morning reviewing consultant proposals for the hotel's international guest services expansion, looking at CVs from people with impressive degrees and corporate credentials. None of them had demonstrated the combination of practical knowledge and cultural sensitivity he had just witnessed from his own maintenance staff. As the impromptu consultation session wound down and the lobby gradually returned to its normal rhythm, Stefan approached Maurice with the measured steps of someone who had just recognized an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Stefan Varga. Could we speak privately for a few minutes?" Maurice returned to his maintenance duties the next morning with his mind still processing the previous day's events. The encounter with Stefan Varga had been brief but significant. A polite exchange of business cards and a promise to discuss opportunities later in the week. The business card now sat in Maurice's wallet like a small weight, representing possibilities he wasn't quite ready to examine. His co-workers' reactions had been as varied as their personalities. Tom, the head of maintenance, had clapped him on the shoulder with genuine pride. "Always knew you were the smart one in our crew, Maurice. About time someone else figured it out." But there were others whose responses carried undertones of skepticism and resentment. "So now you're gonna be too good for maintenance work?" Jake, a younger maintenance worker, had muttered during their morning briefing. "Gonna leave us behind for some fancy office job?" Maurice understood the fear behind the sarcasm. In their world, advancement often meant abandonment, leaving your crew for opportunities that transformed you into the very people who used to ignore you. He had seen it happen before, watched good people disappear into management roles, where they became strangers to their former colleagues. "I'm not leaving anywhere," Maurice had replied calmly. "This is my job, same as always." But even as he said the words, Maurice felt the shift in how he moved through the hotel corridors. The collection of thank you letters he kept in his locker had grown over the years. Handwritten notes from students he had helped, business cards from grateful guests, small tokens of appreciation from people whose problems he had quietly solved. Yesterday's lobby incident had made him realize that these weren't just random acts of kindness. They were evidence of a skill set he had been systematically developing without recognizing its value. Amara had called the night before, her voice bright with excitement. "Dad, Maria texted me from Tokyo. She said your advice about reading social cues has already helped her avoid 3 cultural mistakes." And Chen called from Berlin. Apparently he impressed his professors by understanding the historical context behind German academic traditions. "You gave him that insight in 5 minutes." The pride in her voice had stirred something in Maurice that he wasn't entirely comfortable with. A growing awareness of his own capabilities, a recognition that maybe the skills he had developed in private had real-world value beyond helping his daughter with homework. It was during his afternoon rounds that the first formal request came. Mrs. Patterson, a regular guest from the hotel's diplomatic suite, approached him as he cleaned the windows in the executive lounge. "Mr. Johnson, I hope I have your name right. I was in the lobby yesterday when you helped those students. I have a situation where your expertise might be invaluable." Maurice set down his cleaning supplies, noting how she addressed him with the respect typically reserved for hotel management. Mrs. Patterson explained that she was mediating a delicate business negotiation between American, Japanese, and Brazilian companies. The formal translation services had handled the language accurately, but cultural misunderstandings were threatening to derail the entire deal. "Would you be willing to help? During your break time, of course. This is worth quite a bit to resolve." "Correctly." Maurice felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that came with stepping outside his comfort zone. This wasn't helping students with study abroad preparation. This was real business with real consequences. But Mrs. Patterson's request carried the weight of genuine need, and he found himself agreeing to meet with the negotiation teams during his lunch hour. The conference room felt different from the maintenance corridors Maurice knew so well. The polished table reflected the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the view of downtown Portland spread out like a map of possibility. The three negotiation teams sat in careful arrangement, Americans casual but focused, Japanese formal and precise, Brazilians warm but businesslike. Maurice had spent his morning break researching the specific business sector and cultural considerations involved. As he listened to the preliminary discussions, he began to identify the subtle disconnections that formal translation missed, the difference between what was being said and what was being understood. "May I make a suggestion?" Maurice asked during a natural pause in the conversation. What followed was 20 minutes of careful cultural translation. He explained to the Americans that the Japanese team's lengthy silences weren't indecision but careful consideration, a sign of respect for the proposal's importance. He helped the Japanese negotiators understand that American directness wasn't disrespect but efficiency, a desire to solve problems quickly and move forward together. He translated for the Brazilians the American preference for individual accountability versus their cultural emphasis on collective responsibility. The breakthrough came when Maurice identified a fundamental misalignment in how each culture approached the concept of partnership. The Americans saw partnership as complementary strengths working together. The Japanese viewed it as shared responsibility and mutual obligation. The Brazilians understood it as relationship-based collaboration that extended beyond business into personal connection. "You're not disagreeing about the deal," Maurice explained to the room. "You're using the same words to describe different concepts. Let me show you how each of your visions of partnership can coexist." By the end of the session, the three teams were building a framework that honored all three cultural approaches to business relationships. Mrs. Patterson pressed an envelope into Maurice's hand, his first payment for professional linguistic consulting. That evening, as Maurice sat in his apartment examining the check, Amara noticed the change in his demeanor. "You look different, Dad." "More, I don't know. Confident. I'm not sure that's the right word," Maurice replied, but he understood what she meant. For the first time in years, he felt like he was using all of himself, not just his ability to fix things and remain invisible, but his mind, his knowledge, his accumulated wisdom. "You know what I think?" Amara settled into the chair across from him. "I think you've been preparing for this your whole life without realizing it. All those years helping me with homework, learning languages to understand my friends' cultures, observing people at the hotel. You've been building expertise without calling it that." She was right, Maurice realized. His linguistic journey hadn't been random or purely academic. Every language he had learned corresponded to people in his and Amara's lives, classmates, neighbors, hotel guests, community members. He had learned Portuguese because of Amara's Brazilian roommate, Arabic because of the Syrian family that ran the corner market, Japanese because of the exchange student who had struggled in Amara's study group. "Maybe it's time to start believing in yourself," Amara continued. "Not everyone gets opportunities like this, Dad, and not everyone has the knowledge to make the most of them." That night, Maurice pulled out his language notebook and looked through years of careful observations, cultural insights, and linguistic notes. What he saw was evidence of an education that no university could have provided, knowledge gained through genuine curiosity, necessity, and human connection. The business card in his wallet no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a double, one that he was finally ready to consider opening. Stefan Varga found Maurice during his lunch break 3 days later, sitting in the hotel's staff cafeteria with his worn language notebook open beside a simple sandwich. The contrast wasn't lost on Stefan. Here was a man with extraordinary intellectual capabilities eating a packed lunch in a basement room while possessing knowledge that corporations paid consultants thousands to provide. "Mr. Johnson, do you have a few minutes?" Stefan asked, settling into the plastic chair across from Maurice with the easy grace of someone comfortable in any environment. Maurice closed his notebook, noting how Stefan's presence transformed the mundane staff cafeteria into something that felt more significant. "Of course, Mr. Varga. Please, call me Stefan. I've been thinking about our conversation and about what I witnessed in the lobby the other day." Stefan paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd like to understand your background better if you're willing to share." Something in Stefan's tone, genuine curiosity rather than polite interest, encouraged Maurice to speak more openly than he typically would with someone in Stefan's position. He found himself sharing the story of Elena's encouragement, the grief that had driven his linguistic studies, and his quiet pride in helping Amara navigate an increasingly international world. "I grew up in Romania," Stefan said quietly when Maurice finished. "My family came here when I was 12, and I remember the particular loneliness of not understanding the cultural codes that everyone else took for granted. Language was just the first barrier. The real challenge was learning why Americans did things in ways that seemed strange to us." Maurice looked up, recognizing something familiar in Stefan's expression. "Cultural translation," he said. "It's harder than linguistic translation because the rules are invisible." "Exactly." Stefan leaned forward. "I built my business understanding around bridging those invisible gaps. The hotel industry is fundamentally about making people comfortable in unfamiliar environments. You demonstrated the other day that you understand this at a level that most professionals never reach." The conversation that followed was unlike any Maurice had experienced in a professional context. Stefan asked thoughtful questions about cultural nuance, linguistic subtlety, and the observation skills Maurice had developed through years of quiet attention. What emerged was a picture of expertise that neither man had fully recognized before. "I have a proposition," Stefan said finally. "The Grand Ambassador is expanding our international business services. We need someone who understands not just languages but the cultural contexts that make communication effective. Would you be interested in taking on some consulting work? Informally at first, to see how it develops." Maurice felt the familiar tension between opportunity and security. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't afford to lose my regular job. Amara's tuition—" "I'm not asking you to leave maintenance," Stefan interrupted gently. "I'm suggesting we add to what you're already doing. Flexible hours, project-based work, compensation that reflects the value you provide." Stefan reached into his jacket and withdrew a simple business card. His own, but with additional contact. Information written on the back. "Think about it. There's no pressure, no timeline. But I believe you have capabilities that could transform how we serve our international guests." That evening, Maurice sat across from Amara in their small kitchen, Stefan's business card on the table between them like a bridge to an uncertain future. "I'm scared," he admitted, the words coming out more honest than he had intended. "Of what?" Amara asked gently. "Of failing. Of discovering that what I think I know isn't really professional-level expertise. Of stepping outside my comfort zone at 57 and falling flat on my face." Amara was quiet for a long moment, stirring her tea with the thoughtful expression she had inherited from her mother. "Dad, do you remember when I was afraid to take advanced Spanish in high school?" Maurice nodded. Amara had been intimidated by the class, convinced she wasn't smart enough to handle college-level coursework while still in high school. "You told me that fear was just information. It wasn't telling me not to do something. It was telling me that something was important enough to be nervous about. You said that being scared of failure meant I cared about success." The memory brought a slight smile to Maurice's face. "I remember. Well, I'm giving your own advice back to you. You're not scared of failing because you don't think you can do it. You're scared of failing because this matters to you. Because for the first time in a long time, you're being asked to be yourself professionally, not just the maintenance version of yourself, but all of yourself. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Dad, you've been my cultural consultant my entire academic career. You've been quietly helping people at the hotel for years. The only difference is that now someone is offering to pay you properly for expertise you've already been providing. Maurice looked at his daughter, this accomplished young woman who would soon graduate with honors and begin her own professional journey, and realized she was offering him the same encouragement he had always given her. "What if I accept the consulting work and it goes well?" he asked. "What if it leads to bigger opportunities? What if everything changes?" "Then everything changes," Amara replied simply. "Dad, you've spent my whole life making sure I had opportunities you never had. Maybe it's time to create some opportunities for yourself." That night, Maurice pulled out his collection of thank you letters. Notes from students, business cards, from grateful guests, small testimonials to his ability to bridge cultural and linguistic gaps. Reading through them, he began to see a pattern of impact he had never fully acknowledged. These weren't random acts of kindness. They were evidence of professional-level expertise being applied informally. One letter, written in careful English, by a Japanese student, particularly struck him. "Mr. Johnson, you help me understand that American friendliness isn't false politeness, but a different way of showing respect. This insight changed how I approach relationships here. Thank you for seeing what I needed to learn." Another, from a German businessman. "Your explanation of American business culture as relationship-based rather than purely transactional helped me close a deal I thought was lost. You understand what people mean, not just what they say." Maurice realized that Stefan was right. He had been providing consulting-level cultural and linguistic services without recognizing their professional value. The difference between what he did and what certified consultants charged thousands for wasn't expertise or effectiveness. It was confidence and professional packaging. He picked up Stefan's business card and turned it over in his hands. For the first time in years, Maurice allowed himself to imagine a future where his knowledge was valued, where his expertise was recognized, where his ability to build bridges between cultures could become something more than a private passion. The next morning, he would make the call that would begin his transformation from invisible maintenance worker to recognized cultural consultant. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Maurice Johnson went to sleep excited about tomorrow's possibilities. The check Maurice held in his hands 3 weeks later represented more than money. It was tangible proof that his linguistic and cultural expertise had professional value. His first formal translation assignment for Stefan had been a success, beyond either man's expectations, and word was beginning to spread through the hotel's international business community. The assignment had involved mediating a complex three-way negotiation between American pharmaceutical companies, German regulatory officials, and Japanese research institutions. Maurice had spent the evening before the meeting researching not just technical terminology, but the cultural approaches each group brought to scientific collaboration and regulatory compliance. The morning of the meeting, he had arrived at the hotel conference room carrying a leather portfolio that Amara had given him. A graduation gift she had purchased early, she said, because she believed in his professional future. Dressed in his best suit, a navy blue outfit he typically reserved for church and special occasions, Maurice felt the nervous energy that came with stepping fully into a role he was still learning to inhabit. The pharmaceutical executives were efficient and results-focused, approaching the collaboration as a problem-solving exercise with clear objectives and timelines. The German regulatory officials brought systematic precision, viewing the partnership through the lens of compliance, safety protocols, and established procedures. The Japanese researchers emphasized relationship building, long-term thinking, and the importance of mutual respect and understanding. Maurice's breakthrough insight came during a coffee break when he overheard frustration from all three groups. The Americans thought the Germans were being bureaucratic and inflexible. The Germans found the Americans impatient and cavalier about proper procedures. The Japanese felt both groups were rushing past the relationship building that would make the collaboration sustainable. "May I make an observation?" Maurice had asked, his confidence growing as he recognized the familiar pattern of cultural miscommunication. What followed was a masterclass in cultural translation. Maurice explained to each group how their approach reflected deep cultural values about time, relationships, and responsibility. He showed the Americans that German procedural thoroughness wasn't bureaucracy, but a cultural expression of taking scientific responsibility seriously. He helped the Germans understand that American time pressure wasn't impatience, but a cultural value of efficiency and rapid problem-solving. He translated for the Japanese how their relationship-focused approach could actually accelerate the other group's objectives by building trust that would prevent future complications. The transformation in the room was remarkable. Instead of seeing cultural differences as obstacles, the three groups began to recognize them as complementary strengths. The German systematic approach could ensure the Americans' innovations met rigorous safety standards. The American efficiency could help bring the Japanese long-term vision to market faster. The Japanese relationship focus could create the trust needed for ongoing collaboration. By the end of the day, they had not only resolved their immediate collaboration challenges, but had designed a framework for future partnerships that honored all three cultural approaches. The pharmaceutical executive who had hired Maurice pressed the envelope containing his fee into his hand with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Johnson, this was exceptional work. We've been struggling with this collaboration for months, spending thousands on traditional translation services that missed exactly what you identified in the first hour. May I have your business card?" The moment was both thrilling and embarrassing. Maurice didn't have business cards yet, a professional oversight that highlighted how new this role was for him. But the executive took down his contact information, promising to recommend his services to colleagues facing similar cross-cultural challenges. The success brought more opportunities than Maurice had anticipated. Within a week, he received calls from 3 different international business groups, all needing cultural consulting services. Stefan scheduled regular meetings to discuss how Maurice's growing reputation might fit into the hotel's broader international services expansion. But success also brought unexpected complications. Some of his maintenance colleagues began treating him differently, not with the outright hostility he had feared, but with a subtle distance that hurt more than he had expected. Coffee break conversations grew quieter when he approached. Jokes about getting too fancy for us became more frequent, though always delivered with enough humor to make direct confrontation impossible. Jake, the younger maintenance worker, was the most direct. "So, when are you going to tell Tom you're too good for this job now?" he asked one morning, as Maurice prepared for both his maintenance rounds and an afternoon consulting appointment. "I'm not too good for any honest work," Maurice replied calmly. "This job supports my family, and I respect that. The consulting is additional. It doesn't replace anything." But Maurice could see the fear behind Jake's resentment. In their world, advancement often meant abandonment. People who got opportunities left their crews behind, moving into management roles or different industries where they became strangers to their former colleagues. The tension wasn't limited to his maintenance crew. Some hotel management seemed uncomfortable with Maurice's growing visibility among international guests. The head of guest services, a woman who had always been professionally polite but distant, began making subtle comments about maintaining appropriate boundaries and remembering primary job responsibilities. Maurice found himself walking a careful line, successful enough in his consulting work to attract attention, but careful not to appear to be abandoning his maintenance responsibilities or the colleagues who depended on his reliability. The breakthrough moment came during a particularly challenging week when the hotel hosted an international economic summit. Delegates from 12 countries were staying at the Grand Ambassador, and the strain on guest services was evident. Maurice watched from the maintenance corridors as front desk staff struggled with language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, created scheduling conflicts, and small diplomatic incidents threatened to escalate into larger problems. During his lunch break, Maurice quietly approached Tom, the head of maintenance, with a proposal. What if the maintenance crew could help with the international guest issues? Not officially, we'd still handle all our regular duties, but we could provide cultural support when needed. I could train anyone interested in basic cultural awareness, and we could be an additional resource for guest services. Tom, a pragmatic man who valued results over protocols, was intrigued. You think the other guys would be interested in learning that cultural stuff? I think they'd be interested in being valuable, Maurice replied. Everyone wants to feel like their work matters beyond fixing leaky faucets. The informal training sessions Maurice organized during coffee breaks were surprisingly well attended. He taught basic greetings in major languages, explained cultural differences in concepts like personal space and eye contact, and shared insights about business customs that could help his colleagues better serve international guests. Jake, who had been most resistant to Maurice's consulting success, surprised everyone by being the most eager student. This stuff is actually useful, he admitted, after Maurice explained why German guests might seem rude when they were actually being respectful. I always thought they didn't like me, but maybe I was just reading them wrong. Within days, the maintenance crew had become an unofficial cultural resource for the hotel. When a Japanese delegation needed help understanding American breakfast customs, Jake was able to provide culturally appropriate assistance. When German businessmen were frustrated with American small talk, another crew member could explain the cultural function of seemingly meaningless conversation. The hotel's guest services manager, initially skeptical of maintenance staff involving themselves in guest relations, was forced to acknowledge the positive results. Guest satisfaction scores for international visitors improved significantly, and several delegates specifically mentioned the exceptional cultural sensitivity of the hotel staff in their feedback. Maurice's first formal paycheck for consulting work arrived with a note from Stefan. This represents just the beginning. Your approach to cultural bridge building is transforming how our international guests experience hospitality. That evening, as Maurice sat with Amara reviewing the opportunities and challenges of his expanding role, he realized that his success was creating possibilities he had never imagined. The consulting work wasn't just supplementing his income, it was revealing a career path that could honor both his practical skills and his intellectual capabilities. Dad, you're not just learning to value your own expertise, Amara observed. You're teaching other people to recognize abilities they didn't know they had. That's leadership. Maurice looked at his daughter, struck by her insight. She was right. His informal training sessions with the maintenance crew, his cultural consulting work, his years of quietly helping international students and hotel guests, all of it represented a form of leadership he had never consciously claimed. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Stefan's voice carried excitement and urgency. Maurice, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Something significant has developed, and I believe you're exactly the right person to help us navigate it. As Maurice hung up the phone, he felt the familiar flutter of anticipation and anxiety that had become the rhythm of his new life. Each opportunity brought new challenges, new chances to prove himself, and new possibilities for growth that both thrilled and terrified him. But for the first time in his adult life, Maurice Johnson felt like he was moving towards something rather than simply maintaining what he had. The maintenance work would always be part of who he was, honest, necessary, and dignified. But now it was just one facet of a professional identity that was expanding to include cultural consulting, informal teaching, and bridge building between worlds. The check in his wallet represented more than payment for services rendered. It was proof that knowledge gained through curiosity, necessity, and human connection could have professional value, that expertise developed in private could transform into public recognition, and that a man's worth wasn't determined by his job title but by the value he brought to the world around him. The photograph of Helena holding a Portuguese-English dictionary had sat on Maurice's dresser for 5 years, but tonight he really looked at it for the first time in months. She was smiling at the camera with the particular joy that came from mastering something challenging. The dictionary opened to a page about verb conjugations, sticky notes marking dozens of pages. This was taken during her final months, when the cancer treatments left her too weak for most activities, but not too weak to encourage Maurice's growing passion for languages. Words build bridges between people, she had said that night, helping him practice Portuguese pronunciation for Amara's friends' family gathering. Every language you learn is another way to see the world, another way to connect with someone who might otherwise remain a stranger. Maurice set the photograph down carefully and opened his latest language notebook, the 15th in a series that began during Elena's illness. The pages were filled with observations about cultural nuance, diplomatic terminology, and business customs from around the world. What had started as a grief-driven distraction had evolved into professional expertise, though Maurice was only now beginning to recognize the journey he had traveled. The next morning brought the complex diplomatic situation Stefan had mentioned, a high-stakes cultural crisis that would test every skill Maurice had developed over the past 15 years. The ambassador of Japan was hosting a private dinner for trade ministers from 6 countries, using the Grand Ambassador's private dining facilities. The event was crucial for ongoing economic negotiations, but cultural misunderstandings during the planning process had created tension that threatened to derail the entire evening. Maurice listened carefully as Stefan explained the situation. The Japanese ambassador's staff had prepared the dinner according to traditional Japanese hospitality customs, assuming the international guests would appreciate the cultural authenticity. However, the German trade minister's advance team had requested modifications that seemed respectful but actually violated several important Japanese protocols. The Brazilian delegation had made requests that inadvertently conflicted with both Japanese and German preferences. The American representative staff had suggested changes that appeared helpful but demonstrated fundamental misunderstandings about Asian diplomatic customs. Everyone is trying to be respectful, Stefan explained, but they're operating from different cultural frameworks for what respect looks like. The Japanese hosts are feeling dishonored by requests for changes to their carefully planned hospitality. The other delegations think they're being considerate by expressing preferences, but they're actually creating what the Japanese see as chaos and disrespect. Maurice spent the afternoon studying the specific cultural dynamics at play. This wasn't just about language translation or basic cultural awareness. This was about understanding how different cultures expressed honor, respect, and diplomatic courtesy. The Japanese concept of omotenashi meant anticipating guests' needs without being asked, creating perfect hospitality through careful attention to detail. The German approach emphasized clear communication of preferences to avoid misunderstandings. The Brazilian tradition valued warm relationship building and collaborative decision-making. The American style focused on flexibility and problem-solving. Adaptations. The challenge was finding a way for all 4 cultural approaches to coexist in a single evening without anyone feeling compromised or disrespected. Maurice's solution was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than trying to modify the Japanese host's carefully planned dinner, he suggested framing the cultural differences as an opportunity for diplomatic education. He proposed that the ambassador use the dinner as a demonstration of Japanese hospitality traditions, with Maurice providing discreet cultural context to the international guests throughout the evening. Instead of changing the dinner to accommodate different cultural preferences, Maurice explained to Stefan, we help the guests understand why the Japanese approach to hospitality serves diplomatic goals they all share, showing respect, building trust, and creating an environment for successful negotiations. The evening of the dinner, Maurice found himself in the unprecedented position of serving as cultural interpreter for one of the most important diplomatic events the Grand Ambassador had ever hosted. Dressed in his best suit, he moved quietly between the international delegations, providing context that transformed potential cultural conflicts into opportunities for understanding. When the German trade minister seemed uncomfortable with the extended ritual of gift exchange, Maurice quietly explained that the Japanese approach to gift-giving was a form of negotiation, a way of establishing mutual respect and reciprocal obligation that would actually strengthen the business relationships the Germans sought to build. When the Brazilian delegation was confused by the formal seating arrangements that separated people who wanted to continue earlier conversations, Maurice helped them understand that the Japanese protocol was designed to create new connections and prevent the formation of exclusive subgroups that might exclude other participants. When the American representative's staff worried that their principals weren't getting enough opportunities to present their positions, Maurice explained how Japanese listening practices, including extended periods of silence, were actually signs of serious consideration rather than disinterest or disagreement. Transformation throughout the evening was remarkable. Instead of feeling constrained by unfamiliar cultural protocols, the international guests began to appreciate the thoughtfulness behind Japanese hospitality customs. Conversations became more thoughtful, relationships grew warmer, and the business discussions that emerged naturally from social interactions were more collaborative than anyone had expected. The Japanese ambassador approached Maurice near the end of the evening with a slight bow and a business card presented with both hands, a gesture of deep respect that Maurice recognized and returned appropriately. Your understanding of cultural bridge building has made this evening successful beyond our hopes, the ambassador said in careful English. You have helped our guests see the honor we intended to show them, and helped us understand how to show respect in ways they could recognize. As the evening concluded and the international delegations departed with warmer relationships and clearer mutual understanding, Stefan found Maurice in the hotel lobby, his expression carrying satisfaction and something that looked like pride. Maurice, what you accomplished tonight was extraordinary. You took a situation that could have damaged important diplomatic relationships and transformed it into an opportunity for deeper international cooperation. But the evening's success also highlighted the growing tension in Maurice's position. At the hotel, his cultural consulting work was becoming increasingly visible and valuable, but his official role remained unchanged. Some hotel management seemed uncomfortable with a maintenance worker wielding influence over high-level diplomatic events, while his maintenance colleagues struggled with his expanding responsibilities beyond their shared work environment. The contradiction was becoming unsustainable. Maurice's expertise was being recognized and rewarded at the highest levels of international business, but his professional identity remained that of a maintenance worker who happened to speak several languages. The gap between his capabilities and his official position was widening, creating opportunities and tensions that would soon force decisions about his future. As Maurice drove home that night, Elena's words echoed in his mind. Words build bridges between people. Tonight, he had built bridges not just between languages, but between entire cultural worldviews, helping diplomatic representatives see their differences as complementary strengths rather than obstacles to overcome. For the first time since Elena's death, Maurice felt like he was fully honoring her belief in the power of understanding to connect people across any divide. The confidential documents spread across Stefan's private office desk changed everything Maurice thought he knew about his situation. The letterhead read, Varga International Hospitality Group, in elegant script, with addresses listed in 12 countries. Stefan sat across from Maurice, his expression carrying the weight of a revelation that would reshape their entire relationship. "I need to be completely honest with you," Stefan began, his voice carrying a formality that hadn't been present in their previous conversations. "My presence at the Grand Ambassador isn't what it appears to be." Maurice felt the familiar tension that came with significant life changes, the sense that the ground beneath his feet was about to shift in ways he couldn't predict or control. He waited for Stefan to continue, noting the careful arrangement of documents that suggested this conversation had been planned meticulously. Varga International is considering acquiring the Grand Ambassador as part of our expansion into the Pacific Northwest market. I've been here for the past 3 months, not as the hotel's owner, but as the CEO of the company, evaluating its potential for purchase. The revelation hit Maurice like cold water. Stefan wasn't just the hotel owner, impressed by a maintenance worker's linguistic abilities. He was the head of a multinational corporation conducting due diligence on a potential acquisition worth millions of dollars. The acquisition decision depends on several factors, Stefan continued, but the most critical is whether the Grand Ambassador can successfully expand its international business services. The hospitality market has become increasingly global, and properties that can't serve international clients effectively are becoming obsolete. Maurice began to understand the implications. His cultural consulting work, which he had seen as supplemental income from an interested hotel owner, was actually being evaluated as a key component of a major business decision. "Over the past month, I've observed something remarkable," Stefan said, leaning forward with the intensity of someone sharing crucial intelligence. "The Grand Ambassador's international guest satisfaction has increased by 40%. Business bookings from international corporations have grown by 60%. Diplomatic requests for private event hosting have tripled." He slid a statistical analysis across the desk toward Maurice. The numbers were striking, measurable improvements in guest satisfaction, revenue generation, and market reputation that correlated directly with the cultural consulting services Maurice had been providing. "These improvements aren't coincidental," Stefan continued. "Our corporate analysts have traced them directly to the cultural bridge-building services you've been providing. What you've accomplished informally is exactly what Varga International needs to expand successfully into diverse international markets." The weight of Stefan's words was staggering. Maurice's quiet efforts to help confused hotel guests and struggling international students had inadvertently become a key factor in a multi-million-dollar business acquisition. His expertise, which he had never considered particularly valuable, was being evaluated as a corporate asset. "There's more," Stefan said, his tone growing more serious. "The acquisition isn't just about purchasing the Grand Ambassador. Varga International is launching a new division focused on cultural integration services for the hospitality industry. We're looking to develop a model that can be replicated across our international properties." Maurice felt the conversation, moving into territory that was both thrilling and terrifying. Stefan was describing opportunities that went far beyond supplemental consulting work. He was outlining a potential career transformation that would elevate Maurice from hotel maintenance worker to corporate executive in a multinational company. "The numbers are compelling," Stefan continued, showing Maurice additional documentation. "Properties that provide effective cultural integration services charge premium rates and maintain higher occupancy levels. International business travelers will pay significantly more for accommodations that truly understand their cultural needs, not just their language requirements." The business case was clear, but Maurice struggled to understand his place in Stefan's vision. "What does this mean for me?" he asked carefully. "It means that your expertise has become central to a $40 million acquisition decision," Stefan replied. "The success of this purchase depends largely on our ability to implement the cultural integration services you've been developing. Without that capability, the Grand Ambassador becomes just another expensive property in an oversaturated market." Stefan pulled out an organizational chart that showed Varga International's proposed structure for the Grand Ambassador post-acquisition. At the top was Stefan as CEO, followed by regional directors, property managers, and department heads. But there was a new position that hadn't existed before: Director of Cultural Integration Services, with Maurice's name penciled in beside it. "This is what I'm proposing," Stefan said, "a senior executive position with Varga International, responsible for developing and implementing cultural integration services across our property portfolio. You would work directly with international clients, train staff at multiple locations, and help establish protocols that could be adopted throughout our company." The proposed salary figure made Maurice's breath catch. It was more than 3 times what he earned in maintenance, with benefits that included international travel, continuing education, and stock options in Varga International. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an invitation to join the executive leadership of a multinational corporation. "There are conditions," Stefan continued. "The acquisition of the Grand Ambassador depends on successful implementation of your cultural integration model. If we can demonstrate sustained improvement in international guest services over the next 6 months, the purchase moves forward, and your executive position becomes permanent. If not..." Stefan didn't need to finish the sentence. Maurice understood that his professional future was now tied to the success of a business acquisition he had never known was under consideration. The pressure was enormous, but so was the opportunity. "Why me?" Maurice asked, still struggling to understand how his informal language skills had become central to a corporate strategy. "Because you understand something that most consultants don't," Stefan replied. "Cultural integration isn't about learning protocols or memorizing customs. It's about seeing people as individuals within their cultural contexts, understanding what makes them comfortable, and creating environments where they can be successful." Stefan stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Portland. "I've watched you work, Maurice. You don't just translate languages, you translate experiences. You help people understand not just what others are saying, but why they're saying it. That's a rare skill, and it's exactly what the hospitality industry needs to serve an increasingly global clientele." The conversation continued for another hour, covering implementation timelines, performance metrics, and the specific responsibilities Maurice would assume if he accepted the position. By the time he left Stefan's office, Maurice's understanding of his situation had been completely transformed. He wasn't just a maintenance worker with useful language skills. He was a cultural consultant whose expertise had become central to a major business acquisition. His informal efforts to help hotel guests had evolved into a professional specialty that multinational corporations were willing to pay premium rates to access. The drive home gave Maurice time to process the magnitude of what Stefan had offered. This wasn't just a career change, it was a complete transformation of his professional identity, financial security, and life possibilities. At 57, he was being offered the kind of opportunity he had stopped dreaming about decades ago. But with opportunity came responsibility. The success of the Grand Ambassador acquisition depended on his ability to systematize and expand the cultural integration services he had been providing intuitively. Dozens of jobs, millions of dollars in investment, and the future of the hotel itself now rested on his shoulders. As Maurice pulled into his apartment complex parking lot, he realized that tomorrow would be the first day of either the greatest professional opportunity of his life or the most spectacular failure he had ever experienced. There was no middle ground. only success or disappointment for everyone who was counting on his expertise to make their investments worthwhile. The custom-tailored suit hanging in Maurice's closet represented a transformation he was still learning to inhabit. Amara had insisted on accompanying him to the appointment, her excitement about her father's new professional status evident in every suggestion she made about fabric, cut, and style. The navy blue wool with subtle pinstripes was conservative enough for business meetings, but elegant enough for diplomatic receptions, exactly what a director of cultural integration services would wear. "You look different in it, Dad," Amara had said when he tried it on for the final fitting. "More confident, like you finally match what I've always seen when I look at you." Now, 3 days before the crucial presentation that would determine the Grand Ambassador's acquisition, Maurice stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie that had become a symbol of his professional evolution. In 2 weeks, he would either be celebrating his appointment to a senior executive position with Varga International or returning to maintenance work with the knowledge that he had failed at the highest level of professional opportunity he would ever receive. The stakes couldn't be higher. Stefan had been explicit about the numbers. If the presentation successfully demonstrated the value and scalability of Maurice's cultural integration approach, Varga International would proceed with the $40 million acquisition of the Grand Ambassador. The hotel would be transformed into the flagship property for Varga's expansion into the Pacific Northwest, and Maurice would become a senior executive with a multinational corporation. If the presentation failed to convince the International Board of Directors that cultural integration services could generate sustainable revenue growth, the acquisition would be cancelled. The Grand Ambassador would remain an independent property, struggling to compete in an increasingly global market, and Maurice would return to his previous life with the bitter knowledge of what might have been. The pressure was extraordinary, but Maurice had spent the past 2 weeks in the most intensive preparation of his life. Stefan had arranged for him to work with presentation consultants, cultural advisors, and business analysts who helped him translate his intuitive understanding of cross-cultural communication into corporate frameworks and measurable objectives. The presentation would be delivered to 9 board members representing Varga International's operations in North America, Europe, Asia, South America, and Australia. Each board member brought different cultural perspectives, business experiences, and expectations for what would constitute successful cultural integration services. Maurice would need to demonstrate not just his linguistic abilities, but his understanding of how cultural bridge building could generate measurable business results across diverse international markets. His preparation had been meticulous. Maurice spent hours researching each board member's background, understanding their cultural contexts, business philosophies, and the specific challenges their regional operations faced in serving international clients. He developed presentation materials in 6 languages, created case studies that demonstrated quantifiable improvements in guest satisfaction and revenue generation, and prepared cultural insights that addressed the specific concerns each board member was likely to raise. The evening before the presentation, Maurice sat in his apartment with materials spread across every surface: cultural analysis charts, revenue projection graphs, testimonial letters from satisfied international clients, and statistical evidence of the Grand Ambassador's improved performance since he had begun providing cultural integration services. Amara sat across from him, helping him practice transitions between languages and cultural contexts that would demonstrate his expertise to the international board. "Tell me again about the Japanese board member," Amara said, testing his preparation. "Hiroshi Tanaka, Senior Vice President for Asian Operations," Maurice replied without hesitation. traditional business background, values long-term relationships and systematic approaches. He'll want to see evidence that cultural integration services build sustainable client relationships, not just solve immediate communication problems. And the German representative, Ingrid Weber, head of European business development, she'll focus on operational efficiency and measurable outcomes. I need to demonstrate that cultural integration services reduce operational costs by preventing misunderstandings that require expensive corrections. They continued through all 9 board members, with Maurice demonstrating not just factual knowledge about their backgrounds, but intuitive understanding of how each person's cultural context would influence their evaluation criteria. This was the expertise he had been developing for 15 years without recognizing its value. The ability to understand not just what people said, but how their cultural background influenced what they needed to hear. The phone rang, interrupting their practice session. Stefan's voice carried a mixture of confidence and nervous energy. "Maurice, how are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Ready," Maurice replied, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. "Nervous, but ready." "Good. I've been reviewing your presentation materials, and they're exceptional. You've created something that goes beyond what any of us anticipated when this process began." Stefan paused, and Maurice could hear the weight of responsibility in the silence. "I want you to know, regardless of tomorrow's outcome, that what you've accomplished over the past few months has been remarkable. You've transformed yourself from someone whose expertise was invisible to someone whose knowledge has become central to a major corporate decision. That's not a small achievement." After Stefan hung up, Maurice found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a maintenance worker whose linguistic abilities were a private passion shared only with his daughter and the occasional hotel guest who needed help. Tomorrow, he would stand before a multinational corporate board and present a business case for cultural integration services that could transform how the hospitality industry served international clients. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. Maurice felt different in ways that went beyond the tailored suits and executive presentations. For the first time since Elena's death, he felt like he was moving towards something meaningful rather than simply maintaining what he had. His work had purpose that extended beyond paying bills and supporting Amara's education. He was building bridges between cultures, creating understanding across differences that otherwise might divide people. "Dad," Amara said softly, interrupting his reflection, "I want you to know something." Maurice looked at his daughter, noting the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "I've watched you prepare for this presentation, and I've seen how you approach every cultural challenge you're asked to solve. You don't just translate languages, you translate hearts. You help people understand not just what others are saying, but why it matters to them." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that spread across downtown Portland. "Mom used to say that words build bridges between people, but you've taken that idea and turned it into something bigger. You build bridges between entire worldviews, between ways of seeing and understanding life. That's not just a job skill, that's a calling." Maurice felt the truth of her words in a way that surprised him. His linguistic journey hadn't been random or purely academic. It had been driven by a deep desire to understand people, to help them connect across differences that often seemed insurmountable. Elena had planted the seed of that understanding, but Maurice had cultivated it into expertise that could genuinely transform how people related to each other across cultural divides. The night before the most important professional presentation of his life, Maurice Johnson went to sleep with a quiet confidence he hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow would determine whether his expertise could translate into corporate success, whether his passion for cultural bridge building could become the foundation for a senior executive career, whether a man who had been invisible for most of his working life could step confidently into a role that would make him indispensable. But regardless of the outcome, Maurice knew that he had already succeeded in the most important way possible. He had discovered his true calling, developed expertise that genuinely helped people, and created value that extended far beyond personal financial security. He had honored Elena's belief in the power of understanding to connect people across any divide, and he had given Amara a model of what it looked like to pursue excellence, not for recognition, but for the joy of serving others. The presentation would determine his professional future, but the person he had become through this journey was already a success that no board decision could diminish. The multilingual presentation portfolio in Maurice's hands contained 15 years of accumulated wisdom, carefully organized into corporate frameworks that could convince a multinational board of directors. As he stood outside the Grand Ambassador's executive conference room, he could hear the quiet murmur of conversations in English, German, Japanese, and Portuguese. The 9 board members who would determine not just his professional future, but the fate of the hotel itself. Stefan emerged from the conference room with the measured composure of someone managing enormous stakes. "They're ready for you, Maurice. Remember, you're not just presenting cultural integration services, you're demonstrating why understanding between people is the foundation of successful international business." Maurice nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of nervous energy that had become his companion during moments of significant challenge. But underneath the nervousness was something stronger, a quiet confidence built on years of helping people bridge cultural divides, hundreds of successful interactions, and the knowledge that what he was about to present wasn't theoretical but proven. He entered the conference room carrying himself with the dignity of someone who had earned his place at the table. The 9 board members were arranged around an elegant oval table, their backgrounds and cultural contexts as diverse as the global markets Varga International served. Maurice had studied each of them, understood their business philosophies and cultural expectations, prepared specifically for the questions each was likely to ask. "Good morning," Maurice began, allowing his voice to carry the warmth and respect he genuinely felt for each person present. "I'm honored to have this opportunity to share with you an approach to international hospitality that I believe can transform how we serve clients from around the world." He began in English, presenting the business case with clear statistics and measurable outcomes. Guest satisfaction at the Grand Ambassador had increased 40% since cultural integration services were introduced. International business bookings had grown 60%. Revenue from diplomatic events had tripled. These weren't projections or possibilities. They were documented results from implemented services, but numbers only tell part of the story. Maurice continued, seamlessly switching to German to address Ingrid Weber directly. "Frau Weber, your European operations understand that efficiency comes not from speed, but from doing things correctly the first time. Cultural integration services prevent the expensive corrections that result from cultural misunderstandings." Ingrid leaned forward, intrigued by Maurice's direct approach and impressed by his fluent German. "Can you give me a specific example?" she asked in German. Maurice responded with a detailed case study about the pharmaceutical negotiation he had facilitated, explaining in German how cultural translation had prevented a breakdown that would have cost both companies millions in lost opportunities and damaged relationships. Without pausing, he turned to Hiroshi Tanaka and switched to Japanese. "Tanaka-san, your experience in building lasting business relationships across Asia has shown you that trust develops through understanding, not just successful transactions." He presented the case of the diplomatic dinner, explaining in careful Japanese how cultural bridge building had transformed potential conflicts into opportunities for deeper cooperation. The Japanese board members' subtle nod indicated both surprise at Maurice's linguistic precision and appreciation for his cultural sensitivity. Maurice continued around the table, addressing each board member in their native language when appropriate, demonstrating not just linguistic ability, but deep understanding of their cultural contexts and business priorities. To the Brazilian representative, he spoke in Portuguese about the importance of relationship-based business development. To the French board member, he discussed in French the sophisticated understanding of cultural nuance that international clients expected from luxury hospitality services. What we're really discussing, Maurice said, returning to English for his central argument, is the difference between accommodation and understanding. Any hotel can accommodate international guests by providing translation services and basics cultural awareness, but understanding goes deeper. It means recognizing that every culture brings valuable perspectives that can enhance the experience for everyone. He opened his presentation portfolio to reveal testimonials from international clients, diplomatic representatives, and business leaders who had experienced the cultural integration services at the Grand Ambassador. The feedback was consistently positive, but more importantly, it was specific about how cultural understanding had improved their business outcomes and personal experiences. This approach is scalable, Maurice continued, his confidence growing as he saw engagement in every face around the table. Every Varga International property serves international clients. Every property has staff members who interact with people from different cultural backgrounds. The framework we've developed here can be adapted to any location, any cultural mix, any level of international business activity. As Maurice presented his implementation plan for expanding cultural integration services across Varga's property portfolio, he realized that the nervousness had completely disappeared. This wasn't a performance or a test. It was a conversation about work he genuinely believed in, services that created real value for real people, and a business model that honored both profitability and human understanding. The board members were asking detailed questions now, engaging with his proposals, discussing implementation challenges and opportunities. Their questions demonstrated not skepticism, but serious consideration of how Maurice's approach could benefit their regional operations. The presentation reached its crescendo as Maurice addressed the final question from the board, a complex challenge about implementing cultural integration services across properties in 12 different countries with vastly different cultural contexts and business environments. The beauty of this approach, Maurice replied, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had found his calling, is that it's not about imposing a single cultural perspective, but about developing the skills to understand and bridge whatever cultural differences exist in each specific location. He stood and moved to the presentation screen, displaying a framework he had developed that showed how cultural integration principles could be adapted to any cultural combination. The model wasn't rigid or prescriptive. It was flexible and responsive, designed to honor local cultural contexts while creating understanding across differences. In Tokyo, cultural integration might focus on understanding the subtle communication styles of Japanese business culture, while helping international guests appreciate the thoughtfulness behind Japanese hospitality customs. In São Paulo, it might emphasize the relationship-building approaches that Brazilian culture values, while helping international clients understand how personal connection enhances business outcomes. Maurice switched languages again, addressing specific board members in their native languages to demonstrate how the same principles applied differently across cultural contexts. Each example was specific, practical, and grounded in his actual experience working with people from those cultures. The transformation in the room was palpable. What had begun as a formal business presentation had evolved into an engaging discussion about the future of international hospitality. Board members were sharing their own experiences with cultural challenges at their properties, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, and discussing how Maurice's approach might address specific problems they had encountered. Hiroshi Tanaka spoke in English, his formal tone carrying genuine enthusiasm. Mr. Johnson, what you have presented addresses challenges we face across all our Asian properties. The integration of cultural understanding with business objectives. This is exactly what the hospitality industry needs to serve international clients effectively. Ingrid Weber nodded in agreement. The efficiency improvements you've documented are significant. If these results can be replicated across our European properties, the operational benefits would be substantial. One by one, the board members expressed their support for both the cultural integration approach and Maurice's proposed role in implementing it across Varga International's property portfolio. The signed acquisition agreement that Stefan placed on the table represented more than a business transaction. It was validation of Maurice's expertise and recognition of his professional value at the highest corporate levels. The acquisition of the Grand Ambassador is approved, Stefan announced, his relief and satisfaction evident, and the development of cultural integration services across our property portfolio will begin immediately under Maurice's leadership as our new Director of Cultural Integration Services. The applause that filled the conference room was genuine and sustained. Each board member approached Maurice with congratulations, but more importantly, with specific questions about implementing his approach at their regional properties. Hiroshi Tanaka spoke to him in respectful Japanese about the cultural challenges facing their Tokyo location. Ingrid Weber discussed in fluent German the operational improvements his services could bring to their European properties. The signed acquisition agreement that Stefan placed before him represented more than a business transaction. It was validation of 15 years of quiet study, cultural observation, and bridge building that had culminated in professional recognition at the highest corporate levels. Maurice's signature on the document transformed him from invisible maintenance worker to senior executive with a multinational corporation. "There's one more thing," Stefan said as the formal ceremonies concluded. "The board has authorized immediate, global implementation. You'll be traveling to our properties in 12 countries, training staff and adapting your cultural integration model to local contexts. This isn't just a position, Maurice. It's an opportunity to transform how the hospitality industry serves international clients worldwide." The emotional weight of the moment struck Maurice fully. Standing in that elegant conference room, surrounded by international executives who were genuinely excited about his vision for cultural understanding, he felt the complete transformation from someone whose expertise was invisible to someone whose knowledge was valued at the highest levels of global commerce. As Maurice gathered his presentation materials and accepted congratulations from the departing board members, he caught sight of the maintenance corridor visible through the conference room's glass doors. 6 months ago, that hallway had been his professional world, along with cleaning supplies and repair equipment. Today, his tools were cultural insights, linguistic expertise, and the ability to help people understand each other across the differences that often divided them. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was still in the business of fixing things and making people comfortable. But now, the problems he solved were cultural misunderstandings rather than mechanical breakdowns, and the comfort he provided was the deep satisfaction that came from being truly understood by people from different backgrounds. When the final board member shook his hand and spoke about the impact his work would have on international relations in the hospitality industry, Maurice felt a completion that went beyond professional success. He had honored Elena's belief in the power of understanding, provided Amara with a model of perseverance and excellence, and discovered that his true calling had been developing all along, disguised as maintenance work and private language study. The transformation from invisible hotel worker to recognized corporate executive was complete, but Maurice understood that the most important work was just beginning. Tomorrow, he would start building the cultural bridges that could help people from every corner of the world feel welcomed, understood, and valued when they traveled far from home. As he walked through the Grand Ambassador's lobby carrying his new executive portfolio, Maurice Johnson moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had proven that expertise could emerge from anywhere, that dedication could overcome circumstances, and that the most important bridges in the world were built, not of steel and concrete, but of understanding and respect between people who took the time to truly see each other. The framed photograph of Maurice and Amara at her graduation ceremony sat prominently on his executive desk, a reminder of dreams fulfilled and legacies continued. 6 months had passed since the presentation that transformed his life, and the view from his corner office on the Grand Ambassador's executive floor still surprised him each morning. The city of Portland stretched out below, but his responsibilities now extended far beyond the Pacific Northwest to Varga International Properties across 4 continents. Amara had graduated summa cum laude with her degree in international business, and the pride in Maurice's eyes during her commencement speech had been captured perfectly in the photograph. She stood at the podium in her cap and gown, speaking about cultural bridges and the importance of understanding in global commerce. Ideas that had been shaped by watching her father's transformation from invisible maintenance worker to recognized corporate executive. "My father taught me that every language is a key to understanding," she had said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "But more importantly, he showed me that true communication requires more than vocabulary. It requires the humility to see the world through someone else's perspective." Now Amara was beginning her own career with the State Department's Cultural Attaché program, preparing for assignments that would take her to embassies around the world. Her international relations training, combined with the cultural sensitivity she had learned from Maurice's example, made her an ideal candidate for diplomatic service focused on building understanding between nations. The success of Maurice's cultural integration program had exceeded everyone's expectations. Guest satisfaction scores at Varga International Properties had improved consistently. International business bookings had increased across all locations, and the company's reputation for cultural sensitivity had become a competitive advantage that attracted clients specifically seeking culturally aware hospitality services. Maurice's office reflected his journey from maintenance corridors to executive leadership. The walls were lined with certificates of appreciation from diplomatic missions, testimonial letters from satisfied international clients, and photographs from training sessions he had conducted at Varga Properties in 12 different countries. His language notebooks, once hidden in maintenance supply closets, now occupied a place of honor on custom bookshelves, evidence of the self-directed education that had become corporate expertise. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. Tom, his former maintenance supervisor, had been promoted to facilities director for the renovated Grand Ambassador, and he frequently stopped by Maurice's office to discuss how the cultural integration approach was being applied to staff training programs. "You know what I appreciate most about your success," Tom had said during one of their regular coffee meetings. "You didn't forget where you came from, and you didn't abandon the people who supported you before you became famous." It was true. Maurice had established an employee development program that helped hotel staff from all departments develop cultural awareness skills and language abilities. Jake, the young maintenance worker who had initially resented Maurice's advancement, was now studying Mandarin and had become one of the program's most enthusiastic participants. "Turns out this cultural stuff actually makes the work more interesting," Jake had admitted. "When I can help international guests feel comfortable, it makes me feel like I'm doing something important, not just fixing broken things." The program had become a model that other hospitality companies were beginning to adopt, and Maurice found himself consulting not just within Varga International, but across the industry. His approach, treating cultural differences as assets rather than obstacles, was being recognized as innovative thinking that could transform how service industries approached diversity. Stefan had become more than a business partner. He had become a friend and mentor whose own immigrant experience created a deep understanding of what Maurice had accomplished. Their regular strategy meetings often evolved into broader discussions about the role of cultural understanding in global business and the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of where it originated. "What you've built here goes beyond business success," Stefan had told him during their most recent quarterly review. "You've created a model for how organizations can discover and develop talent that might otherwise remain invisible." The international ET recognition was gratifying, but Maurice's greatest satisfaction came from the direct impact of his work. Letters from international guests who felt genuinely welcomed, testimonials from business travelers who successfully navigated cultural challenges, reports from diplomatic missions that had benefited from culturally sensitive hospitality. These personal connections reminded him why the work mattered. One afternoon, as Maurice reviewed applications for the Cultural Integration Training Program's expansion to South American properties, his assistant announced a visitor who wanted to thank him personally. The young man who entered his office was obviously nervous, clutching a worn backpack and speaking English with a thick accent Maurice immediately recognized as Somali. "Mr. Johnson, I am Ahmed. I work in housekeeping and I heard about your program. I want to learn better English, maybe help international guests like you do." Maurice spent an hour with Ahmed, learning about his background, his family's journey to America, and his dreams of advancing beyond housekeeping to positions that would utilize his knowledge of Somali, Arabic, and French. By the end of their conversation, Ahmed was enrolled in the Cultural Integration Program and scheduled for additional English conversation practice. Watching Ahmed leave his office with excitement and hope reminded Maurice of his own journey from invisible hotel worker to recognized executive. The cycle was continuing. People whose expertise was overlooked were being given opportunities to develop and share their knowledge, creating value for the organization while honoring their individual capabilities. As the afternoon sun slanted through his office windows, Maurice reflected on the path that had brought him to this unexpected destination. Elena's belief that words could build bridges between people had evolved into a career that helped thousands of people connect across cultural differences. Her encouragement of his linguistic studies had become expertise that was transforming how an entire industry approached international service. The photograph of Eleanor holding her Portuguese dictionary still sat on his desk at home, but now it was surrounded by evidence of how her vision had been fulfilled. Maurice Johnson, the maintenance worker who learned languages in secret, had become Maurice Johnson, the executive whose expertise was valued around the world. But the most important measure of his success wasn't the salary, the recognition, or even the global impact of his work. It was the knowledge that he had found his calling, used all of his abilities in service to others, and created a legacy that would continue long after his own career ended. In helping others bridge cultural divides, Maurice had discovered that understanding truly could transform the world, one conversation at a time.